Nobody expected the defending champions to lose by 35 points. But that's exactly what happened. After the game, the Las Vegas Aces had one explanation: the whistle. The problem? The numbers tell a completely different story. Because this wasn't a close game decided by one call. It was a blowout from start to finish. Because if you line up what Vegas said after the game with what actually happened on the court, the gap is massive. Indiana did not steal this game. Indiana controlled it. From the opening tip, this was not a comeback. This was not one lucky stretch. This was not a fourth quarter collapse that flipped everything late. The Fever never trailed, not once. They set the tone early, built the lead, and kept adding to it quarter after quarter, while Las Vegas kept searching for answers that never came. That matters because it changes the whole frame of the game. When a team gets hot late and steals one, people can point to one whistle, one review, one momentum swing. That is not what happened here. Indiana led wire to wire.
And they did it with Caitlin Clark on a minute's restriction. That might be the most important detail of the entire night. Clark had just come back after missing time, and she was limited to around 24 minutes. So for a huge chunk of the game, Indiana's biggest star was not even on the floor, which immediately undercuts the idea that this was some referee-assisted performance built around one player getting star treatment. Clark was efficient, productive, and made history again. But Indiana won this game because the entire team showed up. Start with Aliyah Boston. She set the physical tone early and gave Indiana exactly what it needed inside. She battled A'ja Wilson possession after possession, made her work, and helped control the interior on both ends. That is not a small thing against a player like Wilson. Boston did not just survive the matchup. She made it a real battle. Then there was Kelsey Mitchell. Her scoring did not feel forced. It developed naturally. She stayed patient early, found her spots, and then took over harder as the game moved on. By the end of the night, she delivered the kind of scoring punch that breaks a team's spirit. And then Sophie Cunningham came off the bench and completely changed the energy. When she got rolling from three, the game went from under control to out of reach. That is what made Indiana so dangerous in this one. It was not one player carrying everything. It was wave after wave. Boston, Mitchell, Clark, Cunningham, Billings, Harris, 6 players in double figures. That stat alone tells you how complete this performance was. This was not a team living off whistles. This was a team moving the ball, finding the right shot, knocking it down, and staying connected for 40 minutes. Now look at the shooting numbers. Indiana hit 56% from 2. Las Vegas hit 39%. Indiana shot 48% from 3. Las Vegas shot 24%. That is not a whistle issue. That is shot quality. That is execution. That is one team getting what it wants and the other team settling. Even the rebounding edge mattered more than it looked. It was not some insane gap on paper, but in the flow of the game, it helped Indiana control possessions, pace, and second chances. And once those little wins start stacking up, they turn into a game that feels heavier and heavier for the other team. Then came the stretch that really broke it open. A 43-9 run spanning late in the third quarter into the early fourth. That is not officiating. No whistle creates that. No review creates that. No single bad call creates that. That is one team completely collapsing while the other team catches fire and never looks back. And that is why the post-game comments from Las Vegas landed the way they did. Because when you lose by that margin, after being outshot, out-executed, and outscored by multiple players, blaming the whistle starts sounding weak, especially when Indiana had its own moments of absorbing contact without much benefit. That is where the excuse starts to fall apart. If you want to say the game felt physical, fine. If you want to say the pace got disrupted, fine.
But once you start framing a 35-point loss around officiating, you are asking people to ignore everything the scoreboard and stat sheet are already saying. And they do not support that argument. What makes this even more striking is the contrast in how both teams talked afterward. Las Vegas talked about whistles, reviews, physicality, and fatigue. Indiana talked about defense, ball movement, readiness, and consistency. That tells you everything. One team sounded like it was still processing the shock of getting dominated. The other sounded like it expected to play that well. That confidence matters. Stephanie White pointed to defense. Aliyah Boston talked about ball movement and balance. Sophie Cunningham talked about staying ready. Caitlin Clark stayed grounded and focused on getting healthy and continuing to build. That is the voice of a team that knows exactly why it won. Not because of a call, not because of luck, not because of some weird one-night fluke, because it played better basketball. And zoom out even further, this game matters more because it was not isolated. Indiana had already beaten Vegas badly once. Now they did it again, twice in 1 week. At that point, it stops looking like a hot night and starts looking like a real problem for the Aces. Because defending champs do not get blown out twice by the same team in the same week unless something real is happening. And something real is happening in Indiana. This roster is deeper. The chemistry looks stronger. The scoring balance is more dangerous. The defense is more connected. And even with Clark on a minutes restriction, the Fever still looked like the more complete team. That may be the biggest takeaway of all. Caitlin Clark is the headline. She will always be the headline. But this game was also proof that Indiana is becoming much more than a one-player story. If 6 players can hit double figures, if the defense can force that kind of drop in efficiency, and if the team can bury the defending champs even without a full workload from Clark, then this team is evolving into something serious. So yes, the Aces can blame the whistle, but the scoreboard tells a very different story. Indiana was better. Indiana was deeper. Indiana was sharper. And after beating Las Vegas twice in 1 week, one thing is becoming impossible to ignore. The Indiana Fever are starting to look like a real championship contender.